the activist left grow more vocal, more strident, more powerful, and more arrogant every day. As they do, they throw their weight around and up the ante with their relentless and unpleasant bullying. But it's difficult to think of anything that more clearly illustrates their hypocrisy, intolerance, idiocy, and bigotry than their treatment of white people. If any other groups spoke about or treated Muslims, black people, or immigrants the way they treat white people, they would howl with outrage. And they should, because their actions, rhetoric, and ideology are utterly vile. I've been warning for years that their activism will lead to a sharp rise in racism, division, tension, and conflict, all the issues they claim to oppose. And it gives me no satisfaction to be proven correct yet again. As they spread ever more hate and blame, our societies are starting to splinter. Attacks against white people, both verbal and physical, are spiralling. Division and suspicion are ripping through society, and a backlash is building momentum. It should be beyond obvious that if you relentlessly attack and impugn one sector of society, then parts of that community will respond in kind. Honestly, what did these activists think would happen? Why did they ever imagine that pointing fingers and screaming hate might have productive results? That's an approach that will only ever lead to a sharp rise in hate and resentment. It will not heal divisions. It will pit communities at each other's throats. And we're only seeing the beginnings of this process now. The most depressing aspect, of course, is that there was no need for this at all. We were genuinely reaching a point where things had never been better, where racism was withering and dying. But now it's pouring back in a torrent. The radical left claimed they wanted to eradicate racism, but instead, they've stoked up racist tension and conflict to levels we've not seen in decades. They're igniting a conflagration, and this is a situation, once set in motion, that will now continue to get worse. Yet instead of attempting to calm the brewing crisis, the left are hurling petrol on the flames, amping up their rhetoric to previously unimaginable levels of derangement. They're spreading such crazed theories that it should sound the death knell for their warped ideology. It should wake up their followers to the emptiness, the madness in all the ideas they've been spouting. But they're in too deep to ever admit they got it all wrong. They've spread far too much hate and racism to accept that they're the ones responsible for all the bigotry, division, and animus that's building to a fever pitch, that's tearing society apart. So like the accusers in the Salem witch trials, they'll just keep screaming, they'll continue to point fingers, they will carry on attacking demons that exist only in their fevered imaginations. And in doing so, they will conjure from the ether everything they claim to despise. History will judge them poorly, but we must resist them in the present. We know that there are millions who are too weak or too blinded to resist them, and that those craven supporters dominate our political class, as well as our cultural outlets, the media, and the tech giants. So our voices must become a cacophony to compete. We must yell as one that the emperor has no clothes, that the madness they preach is in contrast to all available evidence, and that the harm they are wreaking is ripping apart our very civilization. We must return to a time where spewing racial hatred is not the norm. How did it ever come to this? How was this madness spread by those pledged to oppose racism? For now, that's irrelevant. What's vital is to highlight this malaise and to stop it before it's too late. Let's look at a few recent cases. There's the Michigan school board member who tweeted, "Whiteness is evil." Of course, she refused to apologise for that, demanding instead that everyone else acknowledge the fact that she's right. In fact, she even expected people to applaud her for her honesty. This sort of vile racial hatred is par for the course, and it's epitomised in the rant of a leftist professor and a recent Showtime series.
I think that white people are committed to being villains in the aggregate, right? The real sort of issue here, and I've heard people sort of say it, is one, I think that white people viscerally fear. It's not that white people don't know, right, what they have done. They know. They fear that there is no other way to be human but the way in which they are human, which is to, so, like you talk to white people and whenever you really want to have a reckoning about it, they say stuff like, it's just human nature. If y'all had all of this power, you would have done the same thing, right? And it's like, no, that's what white humans did. White human beings thought there's a world here and we own it. Prior to them, Black and brown people have been sailing across oceans, interacting with each other for centuries without total subjugation, domination, and colonialism. Right? All of us can sort of agree that a politics that says like there are superior and inferior human beings just isn't the way to go. And that's the thing that white people don't trust us to do because they are so corrupt. Their thinking is so morally and spiritually bankrupt about power that they can't they fear viscerally, existentially letting go of power because they cannot imagine that there's another way to be. It is either that you dominate or you are dominated. And isn't it sad that is spiritually who they are and that they can't imagine a sort of more expansive notion of the world? The thing I want to say to you is we got to take these motherfuckers out.
Me most about white people is when they pretend like they're the victim. What's also annoying is when they kill us.
What is fragile about whiteness when everything has been constructed around it?
Every part of who I am has been distorted or criminalized.
It's really just a bunch of white lies.
We're storming the Capitol!
You're not patriots, you're ridiculous.
One of the definitions of American whiteness is ignorance.
White people, we are not your problem. You are.
Should white people today feel any responsibility for slavery?
Hell yeah.
This sort of stuff isn't just woven into the fabric of our culture. This is our culture. It's pushing disaffected youth towards the far right because people are sick of being impugned, derided and blamed for everything, subject to constant abuse and ridicule, all while being lectured on their non-existent privilege. And this cult has reached new levels of incoherent raving. Few cases exemplify that better than the awful story of Tyre Nichols. Here was a black man viciously beaten to death by 5 black policemen. But of course, the woke left aren't going to let facts and evidence get in the way of their narrative. So this, they screeched, was just another example of white supremacy and systemic racism. It's such brazen idiocy that it should be the death knell for this movement. But this cult has long proven itself resistant to all logic, reason and evidence. Whoopi Goldberg screeched that if it was white people being beaten to death, then maybe somebody would do something about it. Well, Whoopi, white people are killed by the police in greater numbers and at greater rates than black people. It's just that nobody cares when it happens, which is why you've never heard about it, and why you can continue to spread crass idiocy on TV while getting paid a hefty sum, yet still whining about racism. And all this was also exemplified by Britain's race-baiting buffoon of choice, Dr. Shola Moj-Shogbamimu. She went on TV, as she always does, to screech that Tyre Nichols was killed by white supremacy. It's drivel, of course, and the fact that she's continually invited onto TV to rail against systemic racism while spouting such idiocy is proof that it doesn't exist. After all, No one who blamed white violence on black criminality would ever get a slot on TV. And if they even aired their views, they'd be promptly imprisoned. Everything Shola does disproves her cause. But she still had the gall to tell her critics to take your offended, unintellectual masturbation out with the trash, proving that this so-called intellectual can't even construct a sentence, never mind a coherent argument. She then went on to deny being a race baiter and to favour equality, even while spewing more hatred about white people. You couldn't invent that kind of idiocy and bigotry. The likes of Shola should be reduced to screeching in the street, or to be moved on for being a public nuisance. The nastiness, racism, and incoherence of her rant should see her fade from the spotlight with undue haste. But the reality is, the very next time there's an incident, she'll be invited straight back on TV to spread more racist and polarising lies, and to stoke up more resentment and division. And she'll be surprised when there's a backlash for her relentless hate-mongering. The real racists in our society are in plain sight, lecturing us from our TV screens, and shielded by the authorities they claim oppress them. We need to make the voices of reason and sanity heard, even if we're denied the megaphone of publicity that the media continually hands to racist demagogues like Shola. If you've enjoyed this film, please like and subscribe. And if you're interested in these topics, then think about buying my books. They're called The Tyranny of the Left, and they're available on the links below. They go into topics like this in much greater detail. Please do feel free to pick them up and let me know what you think. Thank you.